Welcome back. We're going to take a look at the Fugitive Slave Act and the specific provisions of the Compromise of 1850. This is where we left off on the first section of Chapter 14. And I mentioned earlier that the Compromise of 1850 had 7 different provisions. We're going to take a look at those, their impact on the dynamic leading up to the outbreak of the Civil War, and the impact politically, economically on the expansion of slavery in the territories. So one of the first things that they wanted to do in this big bill was to admit California as a state. Now, I mentioned earlier that California wanted to be a free state, and this is actually true because if we take a look over in your outline notes, these I'll post on Schoology. Californians, of course, by 1848 had discovered gold, Sutter's Mill. A lot of people did not make profits. A lot of people moved into the area from 14,000 to over 100,000 by 1850. California did something unique that other territories did not do. First, it was newly acquired in 1848 through the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, and instead of going through the territorial phase as outlined in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, California asked to be admitted as a state immediately, bypassing the territorial phase and, in that case, blocking the Southern hope to spread slavery. By that, what they referred to is the idea that by going through a territorial phase, California would allow others to be able to move in that process of applying for statehood, they could try and influence the legislature and the number of people who were slaveholders in that area. But most of the people who moved to California didn't bring slaves with them for a variety of different reasons, at least in the very beginning. So what happens as a result is that California was admitted as a slave state. Okay, that was part of the provision. There were also divisions between the territorial governments of New Mexico and Utah over border issues and whether or not they should be slavery in that territory. It was decided in the Compromise of 1850 that they would allow the people to determine, okay, whether or not there should be slavery there or not. Okay, there was a boundary dispute between Texas and New Mexico. Actually, that's what I meant to refer to earlier. That would be resolved in a minor claim by indemnity paid to Texas for getting rid of their claims to a large part of New Mexico. As a result, that border dispute would be settled. Slavery, specifically the slavery and the would not be abolished in the District of Columbia. That would be considered part of the South, and the slave trade would be ended. And finally, a more effective fugitive slave law would be enforced. Henry Clay introduced this in his omnibus bill. We see this in the ending of your section on Chapter 14. However, what happens as a result of this is Clay realizes upon the death over here of Zachary Taylor and the beginning of Millard Fillmore's presidency that Taylor would not support the compromise. Stephen Douglass ends up breaking up the Compromise of 1850. Instead of one large bill into small separate bills, they do it, accept all of those different provisions, and they do get the fugitive slave law put into effect, by which the largest and most controversial part of that law divides the country from different regions to different regions. Specifically, Frederick Douglass becomes more and more of a national spokesperson concerning the kidnappers that he identified were part of the fugitive slave laws and their attempt to return escaped slaves down into the South. Senator Daniel Webster actually does support this bill, and the abolitionists denounce him. He ends up passing away very shortly after this, regardless. Frederick Douglass's outspoken denouncing of the fugitive slave law was a little bit shocking in that he moved from being a moderate to a more radical position. He said the only way to make the fugitive slave law a dead letter is to make half a dozen or more dead kidnappers. He also begins to react more forcefully to the constitutionality of the existence of slavery. We're going to get to that in 1 second. But I also wanted to point out that some states adopted what they called personal liberty laws um, concerning the recovery of fugitive slaves. But most of the Northerners complied, and this actually refers to something that I've been making in essence an argument since the beginning of slavery and racism in the United States, and that is that the institution of slavery is reinforced by the practice of racism, and they are mutually supportive of one another. And we can see this actually by taking a look after the Compromise of 1850 in the state of Indiana. And I mentioned this in response to Emma Vasquez's question concerning the revision of state constitutions after the Compromise of 1850. Indiana actually revises their state constitution to state, no Negro or mulatto shall come in or settle in the states. Negro males are not allowed to vote. Any contract with a Negro should be void, and anyone employed or otherwise encouraged a Negro to remain in Indiana was subject to a fine. Okay, these institutional laws actually reinforced some of the provisions of the Compromise of 1850, which of course reinforced the ability of Southerners to get runaway slaves returned to them. I do want to point out that in practice, this meant that any freed black in the North could be considered an escaped slave and subject to immediate imprisonment. We know this happened to an individual named Solomon Northup. He writes about this experience in a book that he later publishes when he was acquired and sent into slavery. Some of you may be interested in his story. Now, returning to Frederick Douglass and later the arguments that he makes on the constitutionality of the slave trade, I wanted to play for you a dramatic reading by Denny Glover, an actor who, along with Howard Zinn, made a performance of primary source documents in American history. And I want you to think about the impact that Frederick Douglass's speech here has on the specifics of the early 1850s and the pre-Civil War period, also known as the antebellum period. So I'm going to begin with this right here.
Frederick Douglass, former slave, editor of the abolition newspaper, the North Star,
This is Howard Zinn.
was asked to give a speech in 1852 in Rochester on the 4th of July.
Mr. President, friends and fellow citizens, he who could address this audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before an assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. A feeling has crept over me quite unfavorably to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and the natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty in which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and quality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despots of the old world. Travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
I want you to consider not only the oratorical skills of Frederick Douglass, but the content of the message he was attempting to deliver. And I think we can safely say, from our analysis of history, delivered somewhat effectively to the people of the North. You know, it's very interesting, and I just wanted to point this out in our last few seconds, that we have a great deal of abolitionist speech and rhetoric concerning the attacks on the morality and I should say, the immorality of slavery. However, the primary sources referring to the specific defense of slavery are a little bit fewer and far between. And I'll share a little bit more of that when we return and talk about the Union and its peril in the next section. See you then.